The music stopped. The ballroom froze. And then her voice cut through the noise. Are you really my daddy? Why didn't you come to my birthday? In that instant, the mighty CEO's world shattered. But how did a man with everything lose the only thing that truly mattered? And what secret would turn his empire into ashes while giving him a second chance at love, family, and redemption? Tonight, you will hear a story of power, betrayal, and the kind of choice no amount of money can ever erase. Stay with us until the end. You won't want to miss the moment that changes everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our next story and share in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because the truth we're about to reveal will make you question, what would you choose, power or presence? The Meridian chandeliers threw shards of light across silvered glass and polished marble as Alex Ramirez measured the room the way a general scans a battlefield. Because the ballroom smelled of money and victory, and he intended to make both tangible tonight. Trevor hovered at his shoulder like a metronome of caution, murmuring that investors loved a clean narrative, while Ethan Vale, the board's iron voice in a midnight tux, watched from a cluster of donors with the calm of a man already writing tomorrow's memo. Alex saw her the instant the cameras did, because Sophia Bennett moved like a quiet headline. Navy gown, unguarded spine, the kind of poise that irritated men who needed control. And he felt the old spark flicker under the armor he called discipline, so he tightened his jaw and rehearsed the humiliation he'd planned. A public pledge, a question about integrity, a smile that said she had chosen wrong. The MC drifted closer with the microphone, and Alex lifted a hand to time the reveal, since spectacle is nothing without precision. Yet the air changed before he spoke, like a draft from an opening door. And then a small figure slipped free of the crowd and tugged at Sophia's skirt while lenses tilted and champagne stilled. He noted details because details anchor power. Curly hair, patent shoes, a ribbon too bright under chandelier glare, until the girl looked up and the room narrowed to a single impossible color. Amber, not brown, not hazel, but that rare, golden hue the Ramirez men carried like a seal, and Alex felt something shift behind his ribs as if a locked file had popped open on its own. Sophia bent with a softness he remembered and hated remembering, and the MC hesitated, half-smile suspended, while a gossip blogger raised her phone and whispered to a financier with a grin that meant trend. Trevor said, "Sir?" in the tone one uses for earthquakes, and Ethan's mouth barely moved as he sipped, because boardrooms prefer scandal they can price. Sophia whispered to the child with a kindness that undid Alex more than the eyes did, because kindness had always been the weapon he never learned to disarm. He stepped forward, calculating angles and exits, telling himself this was optics, not blood, yet his voice came out wrong. Lower, unarmored, when he said the girl's name without knowing it, and the blogger caught the tremor as if it were proof. The child looked at him with the steady curiosity of 5, and the music's bass line seemed to crawl away, while the chandeliers kept insisting on brightness no one needed. Sophia rose, placing herself between them with a posture that read "do not," and a silence that read "never again." And Alex, who had planned to wound, found himself negotiating with breath. He said too softly for the closest microphone, but not soft enough for Trevor, "Sophia, we should talk." And she answered without looking away from him that some conversations had expiration dates. Then the little voice came like a bell struck underwater. "Are you really my daddy? Why didn't you come to my birthday?" And the ballroom heard it because rooms like this devour moments like that. And Alex felt the floor tilt, not because the question was cruel, but because it was clean. A cluster of VIPs turned with choreographed surprise while the blogger typed lightning, and a senior editor from a society magazine mouthed jackpot to her photographer. Yet all Alex could catalog was the way the girl's hand fisted the silk at Sophia's hip, as if gravity were negotiable only with her mother. He said the only truth he owned, "I didn't know." But the words tasted like a defense. And Sophia, still poised, still flame-contained, said in a voice that could have briefed a jury that he had known enough to choose a merger over a life, and the sentence found its mark. Trevor shifted to block a camera without touching anyone, because that is how discretion works. Ethan's gaze cooled by a single degree, and the MC retreated into banter that sounded like static, while Alex heard the first rumor slide across the room the way ice travels a glass. Quick, inevitable, loud only if you listen. He asked for a minute, not as an order but like a man asking for weather to change, and Sophia let him have the hallway, because mercy is not the same as surrender. So they moved through gilded doors into a corridor lined with portraits of donors who stared down like precedent, and the carpet swallowed their footsteps as if swallowing would erase, although nothing erased. He saw the shape of her breath in the way her shoulders squared, and he smelled jasmine and printer ink from a press room nearby. And he said he had intended to address her from the stage about honesty, which sounded ridiculous in the echo of it. So he shifted to numbers because numbers never blush, and confessed that timing had been brutal then, and she flinched in disbelief so precise it felt surgical, telling him he had reduced a heartbeat to a scheduling conflict and filed it under risk. He said he had built something that required total focus, and she countered that he had built a mirror that loved him back as long as he fed it, then told him without tremor that the girls, plural like a door opening to a second room, held birthdays he could not list, nightmares he had not heard, and questions she could not answer without lying. He asked if they were his, and Sophia gave him the cruelty of truth shaped as dignity, answering that biology is the cheapest part of fatherhood, then added that he had signed away more than equity when he told her to handle it in the language of men who think tenderness is a liability. A photographer drifted into the mouth of the hall like a moth with a credit line. Trevor coughed a warning shaped like a word, and Alex said, please, because the world had narrowed to a point he could not buy, while Sophia said the only budget that mattered was time, and theirs had been spent without him. He pictured spreadsheets and pipelines and cities seen through glass at 3 a.m., and he understood with a clarity that humiliated him that achievement had insulated him from consequence until a child's question cut the insulation clean. He attempted control because control is a habit that impersonates courage, promising a discreet dinner, a driver, a new plan. But Sophia's eyes told him plans were the problem and proof was the price, so he asked what proof would look like, and she said presence, spelled in days, not declarations, then glanced toward the ballroom as if listening for a second small voice he had not yet heard. And the idea of another child widened the corridor into something like a future he had not earned. The music swelled on the other side of the doors, and the blogger's post began to climb an algorithm that loves mortals who play gods, while Ethan consulted his watch the way some men check pulse. And Alex finally said the sentence he had never needed in any deal. I was wrong, which did not repair anything but rearrange the air enough for Sophia to breathe through anger rather than drown in it. She told him the girls were safe with Mrs. Rivera, that safety was the only metric she respected, and that his name could not be a weather system that blows hot when convenient, then added with a softness that hurt more than accusation, that love is not a press release, and children do not belong in fine print. He reached not for her, not for the child, but for something in himself he suspected had atrophied under success, and the reach came up short, which is how learning starts. So he stood very still and let the sting land, while Sophia gathered her gown and turned with the controlled grace of a verdict delivered. The doors opened as if on cue, the chandeliers resumed their tyranny of sparkle, and the crowd received them with the hungry quiet of people convinced they are witnessing something that will matter later, because that is how rumors are baptized into narrative. Amelia, already calmer, pressed her cheek into Sophia's hand, then peered back at Alex with that amber gaze that reordered his mathematics. And he understood that the question the room would ask, can he change, had nothing to do with reputation and everything to do with whether he could show up tomorrow without applause. The Riverside Community Center smelled like tempera paint and old wood and something warm from a kitchen farther back, and Alex stood beneath a bulletin board layered with finger-painted suns, while Mrs. Rivera checked off names with a pen tied to a string and said almost cheerfully that the roof would leak again if the rain kept flirting with the river. He told Trevor to keep the town car out of sight and the press farther, then forced his attention to the worn linoleum under his shoes, because power learns nothing from marble. Sophia crossed the lobby with a clipboard, steady as a metronome, and the volunteers straightened without being asked, while Alex swallowed the reflex to direct, because directing was the lie he hid behind. He had already nudged 3 silent levers: an anonymous grant for repairs, a bridge with the bank, a favor at City Hall. And when a pallet of art supplies arrived, he told himself he was helping. Yet Sophia touched the boxes and said, dry as winter, "We don't accept deliveries with invisible signatures." And he answered, trying to keep money out of his voice, "No strings." But she countered that strings don't need names to tangle. Mrs. Rivera, kind eyes sharp as beads, murmured that sometimes a good deed wears the wrong suit and scares people anyway. And Alex nodded, because tone is a tool, and he had blunted his. Ethan Vale called twice and texted once, and the text read, polite to the point of ice, status on Hastings Urban, which meant the subsidiary that sliced neighborhoods with pastel renderings and called gravel playgrounds underutilized assets. Alex typed nothing, then pocketed the phone, because tonight wasn't about optics. Tonight he would learn the weight of a folding chair. Story time began in a room with a carpet bright enough to forgive winter, and Alex folded himself onto a tiny chair that squeaked, while Amelia took his left side with the authority of a foreman, and Elena tucked into his right like a whisper with a spine. He opened the book upside down, and Elena turned it for him with a small smile that offered mercy without debt, and he read too fast until Amelia tapped the page and said she could build a better dragon in the sandbox. So he laughed and said, "Deal," and didn't hear the contract in the word. Outside, the sand was cold but obedient, and his cuffs gathered grit as he learned that wet holds and dry collapses, which sounded like a sermon he wished someone had preached to him at 25. He ignored a third buzz from Ethan, then a fourth, then the call from a blogger who smelled scandal like ozone. And when Sophia carried juice boxes past the sandbox, she paused just long enough to say, without ornament, "Returning the supplies tomorrow." And he answered, "I understand," and meant it, though it stung with the same clean pain as humility. Coach Miguel from the gym waved a roll of tape like a flag and asked if anyone knew how to fix a torn mat. Alex raised a hand too quickly, failed once, failed twice, and when the tape finally held, he felt a small victory bloom in his chest without a headline to feed it. A girl with glitter on her cheek pressed a sticker to his tie. Missed? Tried again. And Alex leaned in so the sticker could find home, saying, perfect, as if perfection were a kindness, not a score. Sophia watched from the doorway with arms folded into cautious armor, and he knew she was measuring not words but hours, not promises but repetitions, which is how trust gets its license renewed. Mrs. Rivera whispered that the city had posted notice of a redevelopment review in a font more handsome than honest, and Alex's stomach tightened, because handsome lies had built him a throne he no longer wanted to sit on. On Wednesday, Sophia walked to the municipal records office with a tote bag and a patience sharpened by years of being dismissed, and she asked the clerk for paper, not portals, because ink has a way of refusing to spin. The file smelled like dust and toner, and something that remembered basements. Hastings Urban Partners passed its baton to Northlight Holdings, which passed it to a redevelopment fund, which, 10 pages deeper, handed it to Cortez Global, and down at the signature block, the line waited for Ethan Vale's name with a date box already penciled. The attachments labeled the gym, obsolete community infrastructure, which felt like a scalpel slipped under the skin of a place where birthdays had been sung off key with pride. She returned to the center, laid the file on a scarred table where Alex was mending a book spine with stubborn tape, and said, not loud but impossible to ignore, "Your board is the one holding the wrecking ball." And he stared until the words arranged themselves and replied, too slow, "I didn't authorize this." And she answered that machines don't seek permission from their own nameplates. He called Trevor and said the word Hastings like a threat. And Trevor confirmed that Ethan had nested the purchase 3 layers deep and scheduled a board review under bland headings, then asked whether to stall at risk of breach, and Alex told him to freeze everything that could be frozen without breaking law, because this time the law would not be his camouflage. Sophia said, "You can't pay for our lawyer. The city will smell conflict." And he said, "What do you need?" And she replied, "Witnesses, hours, presence. Because money solves what it owns and abandons what it doesn't. and she would not let the center be owned. He reached for an apology that wasn't a strategy and found only, "I was wrong," and she said softer but not kinder, "Then be right with your feet," before she lifted the file again, as if truth needed caring and she trusted her own hands best. He watched her walk away and felt for the first time that control might be the least courageous thing he had ever practiced, because courage has calluses and no press list. He kept coming back, which was new, and the days learned his name without learning his resume, and that difference loosened something in his chest. He stocked the supply closet and miscounted markers. He cut fruit and nicked his thumb, and laughed when Mrs. Rivera stuck a cartoon bandage on him like a medal. He signed up for Saturday repairs under a volunteer alias and failed at hammering until Coach Miguel shifted his grip and said, half teasing, "Let the weight do the work." And Alex realized the sentence applied to more than nails. He took Amelia to the sandbox again, and when the wall fell, she said, "We'll build another," with a shrug that made resilience look easy, while Elena traced a moat with a plastic spoon and whispered, "Water needs somewhere to go," which sounded like physics and forgiveness. He ignored 5 calls from Ethan in a row and sent a single text, "Pause, Northlight," and received a reply that read, immaculate and defiant, "Board will proceed." And he put the phone away because rage could wait, but bedtime couldn't. That night they read slowly, letting Amelia name clouds and Elena draw the dragon's tail with her finger along the page. And when they asked if he would come tomorrow, he said, "Yes," as if the word were a nail he could drive straight. Sophia, shadowed in the doorway, said, "Consistency is a verb," and he nodded because verbs move, and he had been a man of nouns. Outside, the river breathed its indifferent rhythm, and inside, the center exhaled a little hope that didn't belong to him yet, and he knew the hearing would come, and Ethan would sharpen his smile, and the board would dress demolition in elegant language. But tonight he had learned how to hold a book without rushing the ending, and that, for once, felt like a beginning he could defend. The boardroom sat above the city like a glass blade, and Ethan Vale used its reflection the way a surgeon uses steel, because he wanted Alex to see himself just before the cut. Screens glowed with pastel renderings that called the center underutilized. Numbers purred at the edge of arrogance, and the air smelled faintly of toner and cold coffee. Trevor set a folder by Alex's elbow and murmured, almost apologetic, that Amelia's school play started at 4 sharp, and that traffic looked like punishment. Ethan, Tux traded for charcoal and a tie that meant verdict, said in a voice that did not rise, "We will proceed with Northlight. The board expects the CEO to execute, not editorialize." And a director with a silver pen nodded as if duty were a metronome no one could change. Alex asked for guardrails, for a community covenant, for time, yet Ethan answered with the mathematics of impatience and the word breach, while outside a hawk circled the river as if it were reading a contract. Alex's phone buzzed once with a voice note that Sophia had forwarded without comment. 2 girls whispering lines from a fairy tale. Amelia confident, Elena careful, then a small question wrapped in hope. "Daddy, are you coming?" And he felt his ribs shift like a door that wanted light. Ethan saw the flinch and pressed in saying, "We vote, then you sign. Governance is not a diary." And the room, trained by money, held very still. Trevor met Alex's eye and wrote a single word on a notepad, "Choose," and Alex looked at the clock that insisted on indifference and said, as if asking the weather to move, "Push the vote 30 minutes, which made a director chuckle without humor. Ethan smiled the way a glacier smiles and said, "The world does not wait for your domestic schedule," then called for resolutions as the screen streamed graphs that mistook precision for mercy. And Alex understood that this was the moment men later call inevitable to hide the fact that it was a choice. Ethan's counsel recited clauses like prayers while a junior banker clicked through returns that glittered, and Alex imagined the gym floor at Riverside, the scuffed wood that held a dozen last names, the poster with crooked stars that small hands had glued, and immediately hated the way memory fought numbers as if it were a fair fight. He stalled with a question about capital stack and exit timing. He asked for a risk memo that no one had actually read. He suggested a site visit dressed as due diligence. Yet Ethan swatted each delay with a word he pronounced like a gavel, material, fiduciary, obligation, until the table's sheen felt like ice and the clock crawled toward 4. Trevor slid a paper closer. Play starts now. And Alex heard his own voice explaining to Amelia the difference between promise and plan, then watched that voice dissolve under fluorescent light. Ethan raised a hand for the vote as if blessing a congregation. Directors leaned in, pens ready, and Alex felt the elevator in his lungs drop. He stood. The chair seemed offended by his absence. Ethan's eyebrow climbed by a millimeter, which was a paragraph in that language, and Alex said, not loud but irreversibly, "We pause Northlight until substantive community protections are in writing," to which Ethan replied that the board paused CEOs who forgot which side of a ledger they serve. A director muttered, "Reckless." Counsel said, "Exposure." Trevor whispered, "You're out of time." And the world narrowed to a hallway that smelled like carpet glue and threat. Alex walked, then ran, security radioing something that sounded like "why," while the elevator took a century to arrive because metal understands drama and resents it. When the doors finally closed, he saw his reflection cut into thirds and thought that perhaps the split looked truer than the whole, then stepped into a lobby where marble pretended to be mountain, and the revolving door slowed on purpose. Traffic curled around the school like a moat. Yellow buses coughed up laughter, and the late light had turned the building's brick to a kind of honest copper that made Alex feel overdressed and underqualified. Trevor double-parked and said, with the urgency of a friend pretending to be staff, "Go!" And Alex did, his shoes misreading the pavement, his breath discovering what lungs are for. Inside, the auditorium held a human weather of talc and perfume and crinkled programs. Paper snowflakes swung from fishing line above a stage painted forest green, and a custodian with a mop told him with a glance to keep moving. He slid along the back wall as a line of children in cardboard crowns filed past, and then he saw her. Amelia stood at stage left, chin high, eyes scanning like lighthouse beams, and for one brief, cruel beat they passed over him, then paused, then widened. He lifted a hand that had closed 1,000 deals and watched it tremble, and he mouthed what he had never negotiated, "I'm here," while the orchestra of second graders dragged courage from 2 violins and a drum. The fairy tale began with a too loud narrator and a too soft wolf, and Alex stood very still as Amelia stepped into a pool of light and said her line with a certainty that walked across the room and sat in his chest. He reached for his phone out of habit, found it buzzing with messages that promised ruin, then turned it off because a red dot should never outrank a child's face. Sophia stood 3 rows forward, half-turned, profile like a verdict, and when she saw him, she did not smile. Yet her shoulders eased by a fraction, and that fraction felt like a continent. Elena, in a silver star, peeked from the wings and threw him a tiny salute, which nearly undid him. A father 2 seats down whispered congratulations into the air that did not belong to him. A mother dabbed at eyes with a sleeve, and on stage Amelia built a paper house and pretended to protect it from wind, and Alex, who could call real bulldozers by accident, understood metaphor with a force it rarely earns. The curtain call found him close enough to hear the static in the speakers and the small intake of breath a child takes before bowing. Amelia grinned into the wattage. Elena clutched a paper moon, and the crowd stood the way crowds stand when they recognize bravery, not brilliance. In the lobby after, crammed with carnations and syrupy punch and the chaos of achievement, Sophia faced him among backpacks and chatter. Her voice held no tremor when she said, "You left your board." And he said, honest to pain, "Yes." And a parent in a baseball cap passed with the complicated smile adults give men, learning obvious lessons late. His phone came alive again, a flood of headlines chewing the same bone. CEO abandons deal, board in uproar, stock under pressure, while a message from Ethan waited with the courtesy of a threat. Special session scheduled, leadership review on agenda. Trevor touched his sleeve and murmured numbers he did not run away from, because running had a price too. Alex looked at Sophia and said, "I chose here." And she answered, still guarded, "Then keep choosing." And he nodded, because verbs become identity when repeated under fire. The twins crashed into his legs like weather, Amelia breathless, Elena precise, and he caught both, arms learning a new weight that felt like reason. Amelia said, "You saw," and he said, "Every second," and Elena added, "Even the quiet parts," and he said, "Especially those," while Sophia watched as if measuring not this hour, but the next 10. Mrs. Rivera arrived with a plastic cup and a smile that forgave nothing but welcomed effort, saying, "We have the hearing soon. Bring your feet, not your fountain pen." And Alex answered, "Both," then corrected himself, "feet first," which drew a laugh he did not deserve, and took anyway, because the room had made space for him, and space is a currency you repay with time. On the sidewalk, night pressed its cheek to the city, and the headlines kept flashing on screens he refused to look at. Ethan called again, and he let it ring because silence can be an answer when truth is busy. He promised the girls ice cream, and meant it. He promised Sophia he would attend the prep meeting, and meant that more. And when Trevor asked whether he wanted a statement drafted, Alex said, "No statements, not yet," because words had bought him years and stolen his now. He walked them to the car with the caution of a man carrying glass, and did not touch his phone until the doors closed, then read Ethan's final text, "Your seat is not a birthright," and typed back, careful and clear, "Neither is a neighborhood," which would cost him, which was the point. Under the streetlight, Amelia lifted the paper crown she had worn on stage and set it on his head with solemn ceremony, saying, "Now you're like us." And Alex, crown crooked, tie ruined, reputation bleeding on screens he could not control, felt something like peace, because for the first time the tallest building in his life was not made of glass. The gym smelled of floor polish and nerves, and folding chairs rattled as city officials shuffled papers with the stiffness of judges, while the families of Riverside sat in rows too close, their faces pressed with the fear of eviction disguised as redevelopment. Reporters lingered at the edges with cameras tuned for spectacle. And Sophia, steady at the podium, spoke about after-school programs, and the laughter that lived in walls paint could no longer hide. Her voice clear, her jaw tight, her eyes refusing to bow. Mrs. Rivera stood beside her with files clipped into a binder thick with testimonies, while Coach Miguel held a photograph of a championship team framed in cheap wood, his hands trembling, but his back straight. Then Alex stepped forward, and silence rippled, as if the room itself had inhaled. Ethan Vale leaned against the far wall in a suit darker than the mood, his lips curving into a smile that meant war disguised as patience. Alex laid a packet of documents on the table, and his voice, stripped of corporate polish, carried through the echoing gym. As of this morning, Cortez Global has divested its interest in Northlight Holdings and signed a binding agreement to place this center under community protection for the next decade. Gas fell like coins. Reporters leaned closer. Ethan's brow sharpened. Sophia blinked, caught between disbelief and a flicker of relief, and asked, controlled but fierce, "At what cost?" Alex met her stare and said, "At mine," then turned the agreement so every camera could see the signature. Ethan's shoes clicked once on the wood as he approached, voice pitched for everyone. "You traded hundreds of millions for sentiment. Shareholders will eat you alive." Alex stood without moving, the spotlight falling unevenly across his face, and answered, "They can eat me. They won't eat this place." The officials shifted, murmurs filled the hall, and Sophia whispered, not for the microphones, "Do you mean it?" And he said simply, "Yes." Outside, the stock price trembled on tickers. Inside, children clutched their parents tighter, and Mrs. Rivera's eyes gleamed with something between prayer and vindication. Ethan leaned closer, his smile cold. "Your seat will not survive this." And Alex replied, "Neither will your plan." And for the first time, Ethan's silence admitted a wound. The gavel fell with the city's ruling. Preservation approved, demolition denied. Applause rose like a storm, but Alex heard only Amelia's small voice from the back. "Daddy, we can keep the swings?" And his throat closed as he answered, "Yes, we can keep the swings." Later, the air outside was cooler, filled with headlights and camera flashes that painted the sidewalk like lightning. Reporters pressed with questions about leadership crises and collapsing deals, and Alex told them the truth without performance. "I chose my daughters in this community, The board can choose its next chapter. Trevor slid a phone into his hand, screen glowing with market fallout, but Alex pocketed it because tonight was not about numbers. Tonight was about surviving honesty. Sophia walked beside him, arms crossed, but her eyes no longer carved distance. She asked, "Was this about redemption or about us?" And he said, "Both, if you'll let it." And she paused, then murmured, "Redemption first, the rest we'll see." Amelia and Elena rushed forward with drawings clutched in crayon fists, stick figures standing before a house crowned with a rainbow. Amelia pointed and said, "This is us, and you're in it now," while Elena added shyly, "We left space for your name." He knelt on cracked pavement, crown of headlights burning behind him, and wrote "Daddy" in careful block letters. The crowd watching, but unseen, and Sophia's tears slipped free, not of weakness, but release. Days later, in the quiet of the center, Alex read with them again, slower this time, each word landing like a promise sealed in inkless contracts. Amelia rested her head against his shoulder. Elena traced stars across the page, and Sophia stood at the doorway, no longer a guard but a witness, her face caught between armor and hope. Outside, the city moved, boards plotted, markets judged, but inside, the laughter of children drowned out every bell, every tick, every headline. Alex understood at last that power without presence is absence in disguise, and that he had been absent long enough. He would not be again. Thank you for staying with us through this story of power, sacrifice, and second chances. What did it stir in you? Do you believe redemption is ever too late? Or can love and presence truly rewrite a legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Until then, thank you for listening, take care of the ones who matter most, and we'll see you in the next story.